A very good morning. I'm Samantha Simmons. With us for the duration of the show is Munira Wilson, Lib Dem MP for Twickenham, and Bob Blackman, Conservative MP for Harrow East. Welcome to you both. Great to have you on the programme. Well, I want to start this week with the pro-Palestinian protests that are spreading on London's university campuses. They follow similar protests that have occurred in universities in the United States, with students setting up encampments and occupying campus buildings. The protesters have been calling on their universities to sever ties with Israeli companies and other organisations which they say contribute to the conflict in Gaza. The protests here have been largely peaceful, but the Union of Jewish Students say that although they respect the right to protest, some of the language used by protesters has created an atmosphere that is toxic and hateful for Jewish students. Well, we're joined in the studio by Magain Inon, who is Israeli, and from Washington, D.C. by Hamza Awawade, who is Palestinian. Together, they tour UK schools, universities, synagogues and mosques, promoting the idea of peace in the Middle East, community, cohesion and dialogue. Welcome to you both. Thank you very much for being on the programme.
Thank you.
Magain, I want to start with you and what's happened to your family. Tell us your story.
So very briefly, on October 7th, the village where I'm from, where my family is from, was attacked by Hamas terrorists. We don't know all the details, but they've murdered 20 people in the village, including my parents. And we've been dealing with that trauma since.
I'm so sorry, it's horrendous. We extend your sympathies to you and your family.
Thank you.
We'll talk about the work that you're doing in just a moment, but Hamza, welcome to you. Thank you for joining us from Washington, D.C. Tell us your family's story.
My family, like any Palestinian family living under the occupation, they have been impacted. The occupation has different stages and different situations. Right after the occupation started in 1967, my grandfather took initiative to fight the Israeli army and was in a situation where they were after him and he was attacking them for 10 years, and eventually he was killed by the army. And afterwards, every single member of my family have been involved in a way or another. But the evolution has reached a point where we have seen that that only peace and there's no violent solution to this conflict, and we should be ready now to go for peace. Like, there's no points to be made anymore. It's a clear situation.
Hamza, thank you. Again, you've suffered this horrendous, unimaginable loss, the murder of your parents. How have you come together with Hamza to reach out to people across the divide, to talk about peace and bringing the communities together? How did that come about?
So first of all, for me and my siblings, I'm the youngest of 5, it felt immediately as the only meaningful thing to do at this time. We felt that calling for peace, calling against a war of revenge is the right thing to do, and this is what gives meaning to my parents' legacy, to their values and to our values, and this is what we want for our children in the future. And with those values, I reached out to the media here in the UK. I live here, published a few things, and then got some organizations reached out to me, among them the Together Coalition and Yachad, which is a Jewish-British organization. And we organized a vigil in Westminster where about 5,000 people attended, and this is where I first met Hamza. He came to speak, and immediately we saw that we have a good understanding, and we stood on the platform together and called for peace. And I thought that was a very powerful moment for me personally, but also for many people in the crowd and people who heard about it.
Yeah, absolutely inspirational. Hamza, your family has suffered decades of trauma as well. Tell us about the coming together here with this gentleman, Magain, and how you're now reaching out to other people.
Yeah, so before October 7th, I was already activist in really raising awareness, especially with governments, about the unsustainability of the situation in Palestine and Israel. But October 7th was huge and was very traumatizing for me personally, and I wasn't ready to speak to anyone anymore. but was really easy to speak with Magen and his mother Maoz, because they were outspoken about their position with this war, despite their really very, very terrible loss. So when I was invited and knew which Israelis I'm going to stand with, it was easy. It was easy because we really have enough common ground to stand together and help each other advance our agenda, because what's happening has nothing to do with us personally, but also with so many Palestinian and Israeli civilians who actually will emerge from this war much devastated. And
Magen, tell us what you make of the protests on some university campuses, because you've been speaking to students a lot. How is the right to protest balanced with the intimidation that some Jewish students say they're feeling?
It's a situation where everybody's right. People should have the right to protest, and I think that's absolutely fine. I think some in those protests are very extreme, and I wish those extreme voices would be left out of the protest. I think you can protest against what is happening in Gaza, what is happening in the West Bank, what is happening in Israel. You can protest without inciting violence, and this would be I think a matter for the authorities here, but definitely also from within the protest movement. And I can also understand why someone hearing the slogan or certain slogans used by the protest movement can hear them as if someone is, thinking that Jewish lives are not as important as Palestinian lives, and vice versa. And so that's the risk.
Yeah. Bob, the Prime Minister has met with university chancellors, hasn't he, to tell them to take a zero-tolerance approach to anti-Semitism. Universities, though, warning that heavy-handed measures could be counterproductive and inflame the situation. Where is the balance here?
Well, the problem is, obviously, that you've got students that are probably away from home for the first time ever, are encountering anti-Semitism for the first time ever in a really serious manner, and they feel threatened. And I don't blame them for being really concerned about their safety. What's going on in the United States now, at many universities, that Jewish parents are telling their children not to apply to these major universities.
But here in the
that's
UK,
the risk. Well, that's the risk of escalation, that we could get to the same point, and that's a disaster. Universities should be, and are, an opportunity for people to freely debate things, and the point is, having free debate and discussion and understanding on both sides. And one of the things I've called for is, at the moment, Holocaust education is compulsory in our schools education. I've said that we should actually have the history of the Middle East in a complete way, going back literally 3,500 years, not obviously every detail, but so that young people understand the history of this, rather than taking a fixed view of things either started on the 7th of October or started at a particular time. Because unfortunately, we're not making progress with young people, and I think there is widespread ignorance amongst our young people about the circumstances.
Munira.
Well, obviously we must support the right to protest, but also we must support every Jewish student's right to be able to go about their studies without fear of intimidation or violence. My concern is that this focus on the protests and some of the extreme fringes of the protests that Magen has talked about potentially actually takes away from the issue at hand, which is the catastrophe unfolding in Gaza and the fact that we've still got hostages being held and maltreated by Hamas, and the issue at hand here. That's what we need to be focusing on, and I think what Hamza and Magen are doing is absolutely inspirational. We need to see more of that. I mean, the government has committed some money to tackling anti-Semitism in schools and universities. We've only seen what the first $500,000 of that 7 million is being spent on. I've been calling for more information and from the government on how that's being spent. I've heard, for example, from school students in my constituency that they want to be able to discuss and debate the issues around the conflict. conflict, but they're not given the space to. And I suspect that's because a lot of teachers and schools are concerned about how to facilitate that. And I think we need to be using groups like Magen and Hamza's group and others to facilitate those conversations, not just in schools, but in universities, so that we can bring people together and foster that understanding.
Hamza, what kind of reaction do you get when you talk to students, some of them who may be part of these protests, and the vast majority of these protesters at universities here are peaceful, but what kind of reaction do you get as a Palestinian standing alongside an Israeli Jew to try and foster better relations?
Honestly, very positive reactions. I don't tell the students that they shouldn't care. I tell them, you actually should care, because you are the one who can really make a difference. No one is neutral in this conflict. America is not neutral. Iran is not neutral, and the students shouldn't be neutral. But they should really be careful. And I tell them from my story, my family story, and I tell them what's actually waiting for us. The future looks really dark. And if they really don't play the game with highest moral values and strategic thinking, they are actually not helping anyone, and they might be harming people.
Okay.
So we need them. They're strategic to us, but they have to play the game better, and obviously to be more moral, because it's not about threatening Jewish students. Actually, Jewish students should be invited to these marches, and their voice should be heard, and their fears should be acknowledged.
Hamza, again, thank you very much for telling us your stories and for being with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.